In early 1944, at an airfield in Dayton, Ohio, a test pilot carefully adjusted the throttle of a P-51B Mustang, pushing it beyond the standard wartime emergency power limit. The aircraft's engine roared to life as the boost pressure climbed to 75 inches of mercury, supplied by a novel experimental fuel identified as grade 150. The airspeed indicator surged past figures that represented the zenith of what Allied fighters had previously accomplished. At 25,000 feet, the Mustang was accelerating past 448 miles per hour. On the ground, test engineers exchanged knowing glances as the pilot's report crackled over the radio. This was no mere incremental improvement. It was a revolution concealed within purple-dyed aviation gasoline. A chemical superiority so profound it would shatter every assumption the Luftwaffe held regarding American fighter capabilities. The war in Europe was poised for a dramatic shift, not driven by a new aircraft design or a clever tactical maneuver, but by a fuel that enabled existing fighters to perform at levels that defied German expectations. What the Luftwaffe remained unaware of was that American and British fuel chemists had achieved a breakthrough the Third Reich's synthetic fuel program could never replicate. While German fighters contended with B-4 fuel rated at 91 octane on the lean mixture scale, and their finest C3 fuel barely approached the equivalent of Allied 130-grade fuel, American refineries were producing aviation gasoline with a performance number of 150. The implications were monumental. A P-51 Mustang operating on standard 130-grade fuel could reach 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. The identical aircraft, piloted by the same aviator at the same altitude but fueled with 150-grade fuel, could surpass 448 miles per hour. German fighter pilots, who had come to respect the Mustang's impressive range and high-altitude performance, were about to discover that the Americans had fundamentally altered the dynamics of aerial combat. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G, the Luftwaffe's primary frontline fighter in early 1944, possessed a maximum speed of 400 miles per hour at altitude. The Focke-Wulf FW 190A could reach 408 miles per hour under ideal conditions. Against Mustangs running on 130-grade fuel, German pilots could at least consider engaging on terms that offered a semblance of parity. However, against Mustangs powered by 150-grade fuel, German fighters were at a fundamental disadvantage, a gap that no amount of pilot skill or strategic astuteness could bridge. The genesis of this advantage traces back not to the crucible of war, but to the peacetime investigations of petroleum chemists who understood that octane rating quantified the degree to which an air-fuel mixture could be compressed before spontaneous detonation occurred. Higher compression ratios translated to greater power output from each combustion cycle, and more power meant faster aircraft and loftier operational ceilings. The underlying science was straightforward, yet the engineering required to produce high-octane aviation fuel on an industrial scale presented extraordinary complexities. In 1940, as the war raged across Europe, American aviation fuel production primarily focused on 87-octane gasoline. While adequate for commercial aviation and early military trainers, it was woefully insufficient for high-performance combat aircraft. The British, desperate for any edge against the Luftwaffe's numerical superiority, collaborated with American oil companies to develop 100-octane fuel, which became available just in time for the Battle of Britain. The impact was immediate and undeniable. British Spitfires and Hurricanes, utilizing 100-octane fuel, suddenly gained 30 to 40 miles per hour in speed at altitude, and their climb rates improved by 500 to 1,000 feet per minute. German pilots, who had previously enjoyed performance advantages with their 91 to 100-octane fuels, found themselves facing adversaries on even terms. The subsequent development of 130-grade fuel represented another significant leap forward. This fuel, with its performance number of 130 on rich mixture settings, became the cornerstone of Allied air power throughout 1943. It powered the Merlin engines within both Spitfires and Mustangs, the Allison engines in P-38 Lightnings, and the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double-wasp radial engines in P-47 Thunderbolts. Production scaled rapidly under the guidance of the pioneering aviation fuel advocate, General James Doolittle, who had tirelessly campaigned throughout the 1930s to persuade both the military and oil corporations to invest in high-octane fuel development. By 1943, 17 Allied refineries were producing high-octane aviation gasoline, employing the catalytic cracking process perfected by the French immigrant engineer Eugene Houdry. American refineries alone were generating millions of gallons monthly, sufficient to sustain the colossal bomber offensives against Germany and the expanding fighter forces tasked with their protection. German fuel production, in contrast, remained constrained by its reliance on synthetic fuel derived from coal. The Burgess process, which converted German coal into aviation gasoline, was technically sound but exceedingly slow and resource-intensive. Even at its peak, Germany could produce only a fraction of the high-octane fuel flowing from American refineries. The majority of German fighters operated on B4 fuel, rated at approximately 91 octane on the lean mixture scale. Their premium C3 fuel, primarily utilized in BMW 801-powered Focke-Wulf 190s and select Messerschmitt variants, was roughly equivalent to Allied 130-grade fuel, but was available in significantly more limited quantities. By 1944, perhaps two-thirds of German aviation fuel production was C3 grade. Yet this still represented a small fraction of the Allied output. Understanding fuel performance necessitates grasping a fundamental principle of internal combustion engines. Octane ratings measure detonation resistance. As a piston compresses the air-fuel mixture during the compression stroke, temperature and pressure escalate dramatically. If the fuel ignites spontaneously before the spark plug fires, the result is detonation, an uncontrolled explosion rather than a controlled burn. Detonation generates shock waves that can damage or destroy engine components. Higher octane ratings indicate that the fuel can withstand greater compression without detonating. By definition, octane ratings cannot surpass 100, as 100 octane signifies detonation resistance equivalent to pure isooctane, the established reference standard. Performance numbers, conversely, quantify how much better a fuel performs compared to pure isooctane. A fuel with a performance number of 150 signifies that it can withstand 50% more compression than pure isooctane before detonating. The creation of such a fuel necessitated the incorporation of anti-knock compounds, predominantly tetraethyl lead, and the precise blending of aromatic hydrocarbons like toluene and xylene with the base gasoline. British fuel chemists at the Royal Aircraft Establishment meticulously tested numerous blends throughout 1942 and 1943, seeking the optimal equilibrium of anti-knock properties, energy content, and manufacturing feasibility. American researchers at Wright Field conducted parallel investigations, sharing their data with their British counterparts. By early 1943, both nations had produced experimental batches of what they designated as 150-grade fuel. This designation was somewhat misleading, as it implied an octane rating of 150, which was chemically impossible. It actually signified a fuel with a performance number of 150 on the rich mixture scale, combined with 100 octane performance on the lean mixture scale. This fuel, dyed purple for easy identification, underwent extensive testing during 1943, yielding results that exceeded all expectations. Merlin engines running on 150-grade fuel could sustain manifold pressure readings of 75 inches of mercury, compared to 67 inches on 130-grade fuel. This translated directly into increased horsepower. A Packard Merlin V1657, the engine powering the P-51 Mustang, generated 1,490 horsepower at standard military power on 130-grade fuel. The identical engine, operating on 150-grade fuel at war emergency power settings in a P-51B with its V1653 Merlin variant, produced 1,720 horsepower, pushing output to approximately 1,600 horsepower. Flight testing at Wright Field confirmed that the performance gains were substantial across all flight regimes. Maximum speed increased by approximately 25 to 30 miles per hour at altitude. Climb rates improved by several hundred feet per minute. Most critically, these enhancements were achieved without any modifications to the aircraft itself. The same Mustang, flown one day on 130-grade fuel and the next on 150-grade fuel, became measurably faster and more capable simply due to what flowed through its fuel lines. The decision to introduce 150-grade fuel to operational fighter squadrons was finalized in early 1944, with timing carefully considered. The 8th Air Force, stationed in England and conducting daylight strategic bombing raids deep into Germany, was suffering unsustainable losses. Despite the arrival of the first P-51 Mustangs in December 1943, German fighter forces continued to inflict heavy casualties on American bomber formations. American planners required not just an escort fighter with long range, but one so swift that German interceptors would struggle to evade or refuse combat on unfavorable terms. In May 1944, the initial operational deliveries of 150-grade fuel arrived in England. Distribution was meticulously controlled. Not every fighter group received the new fuel immediately. The 8th Air Force began with select squadrons, both to manage supply logistics and to evaluate combat performance. The British Royal Air Force, which had spearheaded much of the early testing, also commenced equipping fighter squadrons with the new fuel. Priority was given to units tasked with high-speed interception missions, particularly those targeting the German V-1 flying bombs that commenced their terrorization of London in June 1944. The V-1 flew at approximately 400 miles per hour at low altitude. Intercepting these weapons demanded fighter aircraft capable of matching or exceeding that speed at sea level or low altitudes, where air density diminished the performance of all aircraft. Hawker Tempests and Spitfire. Mark 14s could barely intercept the V-1s. Mustangs running on standard fuel were marginal. Mustangs, fueled with 150-grade fuel, possessed sufficient speed margins for reliable interception. On June 18, 1944, Major R.E. Turner of the 356th Fighter Squadron destroyed a V-1 flying bomb by tipping its wing with his P-51's wingtip, a technique employed at least 16 times during the campaign. This maneuver required exceptional speed and precision to position the fighter's wingtip within 6 inches of the V-1's wing surface, then utilize the airflow to roll the flying bomb off course and cause it to crash. The first widespread combat utilization of 150-grade fuel by American P-51 pilots occurred in June 1944, coinciding with the Normandy invasion. Fighter groups of the 8th Air Force, tasked with achieving air superiority over the invasion beaches, conducted combat air patrols and bomber escorts, utilizing the new fuel. German fighter pilots began reporting encounters with Mustangs that performed beyond their previous experiences. Luftwaffe intelligence officers collected pilot reports describing American fighters that were uncatchable in any flight regime, that could accelerate away from German interceptors with ease, and that seemed to possess inexplicable power reserves. These reports were initially dismissed as pilot error or exaggeration. German fighter pilots, the intelligence officers reasoned, were fatigued, outnumbered, and facing mounting losses. Their accounts of superior American fighter performance were surely a consequence of stress and exhaustion rather than actual performance enhancements. This assessment was fundamentally flawed, but the truth would not become apparent until after the war. Erich Hartmann, a Luftwaffe ace credited with 275 victories, largely achieved on the Eastern Front, flew combat missions against American fighters over Germany in 1944. In interviews conducted during the 1970s and 80s, Hartmann spoke of his encounters with late-war Mustangs. He recalled being astonished by the performance of American fighters during the war's final year. Hartmann, who would later test fly captured American aircraft, including the P-51, P-47, and P-38, noted that the Mustang, in particular, impressed him with its speed, climb capability, and high-altitude performance. What Hartmann and other German pilots failed to realize during combat was that they were facing an aircraft whose performance had been chemically enhanced beyond its design specifications, operating at power settings the original Mustang engineers had never envisioned. The Merlin engine, designed by Rolls-Royce and manufactured under license by Packard, had been engineered with meticulous attention to thermal limits, bearing loads, and detonation margins. Operating an engine at higher boost pressures pushed all these parameters closer to their thresholds. What rendered 150-grade fuel revolutionary was its ability to allow engines to operate at these extreme settings without the catastrophic detonation that would have destroyed engines running on lower-grade fuels at the same boost pressures. The chemistry underlying this capability involved the intricate interplay of fuel molecules, air molecules, heat, and pressure within the engine's combustion chamber. Tetraethyl lead, the principal anti-knock additive, functioned by disrupting the chemical chain reactions that precipitated spontaneous ignition. However, there were trade-offs. Tetraethyl lead was toxic, necessitating careful handling by ground crews. It left deposits on spark plugs, valves, and cylinder walls, increasing maintenance requirements. 150-grade fuel, with its exceptionally high lead content, exacerbated these maintenance issues. Fighter groups employing the new fuel experienced more frequent spark plug fouling and increased cylinder wear. American maintenance procedures adapted swiftly. Spark plug replacement intervals were shortened. Cylinder inspections became more frequent. Engines' overhaul schedules were adjusted. The performance gains were deemed worth the increased maintenance burden. For pilots, the transition to 150-grade fuel necessitated new operating procedures. Manifold pressure limits were elevated. Pilots had to exercise caution to avoid overboosting engines, particularly at low altitudes where air density was greatest. Most significantly, pilots had to learn to manage fuel consumption. 150-grade fuel offered enhanced power, but operating at maximum boost consumed fuel at an accelerated rate. Escort missions to Berlin and back already pushed the Mustang's range to its limits. Harnessing the full capability of the new fuel demanded astute fuel management, discerning when to deploy maximum power and when to throttle back for cruise efficiency. Combat reports from the summer and fall of 1944 document this transformation. 8th Air Force fighter groups, equipped with the new fuel, reported higher victory-to-loss ratios and an increased capacity to intercept German fighters attempting to attack bomber formations. German fighters that had previously been able to execute swift, slashing attacks and then disengage now found themselves incapable of outrunning pursuing Mustangs. On August 6, 1944, Lieutenant Hollis Bud Nalin of the 357th Fighter Group, participating in Operation Frantic missions to Soviet air bases, encountered German fighters over Eastern Europe. Piloting his P-51D named Hell's Bells and running on 150-grade fuel, Nalin engaged a Messerschmitt Bf-109 flown by Günther Schack. In the ensuing engagement, Nalin's speed advantage proved decisive. He rapidly closed on Schack's aircraft and delivered a burst that damaged the German fighter's cooling system. Low on fuel and ammunition following the engagement, Nalin broke off pursuit and waved to the German pilot before resuming his escort duties. Schack managed to belly-land his crippled aircraft near German lines. For 40 years, Schack pondered why the American pilot had not finished him off, never realizing that Nalin believed he had merely damaged rather than decisively destroyed the aircraft. When historians later connected the two pilots and arranged a meeting in Germany, Schack acknowledged that the American Mustang had demonstrated performance that surpassed anything he had previously encountered. The speed with which Nalin had closed and the evident power reserves during the engagement were unlike previous combats with American fighters. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe pilots was profound. Already outnumbered and facing superior Allied numbers, they now confronted American fighters that appeared to possess unlimited performance margins. Their tactical options dwindled dramatically. They could attempt mass assaults, hoping sheer numbers would overwhelm the escorts. They could refuse combat altogether, preserving their aircraft and pilots. Or they could engage and likely face destruction at the hands of Mustangs that were faster, more agile, and piloted by American aviators who were growing increasingly confident and aggressive. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, famously remarked upon observing P-51 Mustangs over Berlin that he knew the war was lost. This comment reflected the Luftwaffe's strategic predicament. The Mustang's extended range meant that no corner of Germany was safe from American daylight bombing. The introduction of superior fuel in mid-1944 intensified this crisis. Luftwaffe technical intelligence eventually acquired samples of Allied 150-grade fuel from captured drop tanks or downed aircraft. German fuel chemists analyzed the samples and confirmed what Luftwaffe pilots had been reporting. The Americans had developed aviation gasoline with performance characteristics exceeding anything their synthetic fuel plants could produce. Some German sources suggested that late-war C3 fuel approached performance numbers of 150, but production was limited and quality was inconsistent. Allied bombing of German synthetic fuel plants, particularly the raids on Leuna and other major facilities in May and June 1944, further constrained German fuel production. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was rationing fuel. Fighter units received priority, but even they operated under stringent limitations. Training for new pilots was severely curtailed. Many German pilots reached operational units with minimal flying experience compared to American pilots, who typically accumulated several hundred hours of training before entering combat. Between January and May 1944, prior to the widespread introduction of 150-grade fuel, American bombers sustained loss rates of approximately 3 to 6% per mission. These were losses that, while painful, were still sustainable. Between June and December 1944, following the introduction of 150-grade fuel and the achievement of air superiority, loss rates plummeted to under 2% per mission. Fighter victories surged dramatically. American P-51 groups across the 8th, 9th, and 15th Air Forces claimed approximately 4,950 German aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat between late 1943 and May 1945, with a significant portion of those victories occurring after June 1944. The German Pilot Corps, which had entered 1944 with substantial experience despite heavy losses on the Eastern Front, was systematically decimated. By D-Day on June 6, 1944, only 2 Luftwaffe aircraft appeared over the Normandy beaches. The Luftwaffe still possessed thousands of fighters, but lacked the fuel, the trained pilots, and the tactical flexibility to employ them effectively. The technical specifications of 150-grade fuel warrant examination. The fuel's lean mixture octane rating of 100 meant it resisted detonation as effectively as pure isooctane when engines operated at cruising power settings. The fuel's rich mixture performance number of 150 signified its ability to withstand 50% more compression than isooctane when engines operated at maximum power. This combination enabled pilots to cruise efficiently for maximum range, then transition to rich mixtures at high power for combat. Confidence that the engine would not detonate, even at extreme boost pressures, was paramount. The handling procedures for 150-grade fuel required special precautions due to its high tetraethyl lead content. Ground crews wore protective gear when fueling aircraft. Spills were promptly cleaned up to prevent lead poisoning. Fuel tankers and reserve containers were meticulously labeled to preclude accidental commingling of different fuel types. Notwithstanding these stringent measures, the safety record remained commendable. Incidents of industrial mishap were infrequent. The transition to new operational squadrons necessitated pilot instruction. Aviators received comprehensive briefings detailing the characteristics of the novel fuels and updated engine operation protocols. Manifold pressure thresholds were elevated. Operational directives stipulated the timing and methodology for engaging maximum power settings. No modifications were required for the aircraft. The engines, fuel delivery systems, and all associated components demonstrated full compatibility with both fuel grades. This inherent compatibility streamlined logistical arrangements and operational procedures. Production figures painted a vivid picture of industrial mobilization on a scale unparalleled by Germany. From May of 1944 to April of 1945, the 8th Air Force consumed upwards of 53 million gallons of 150-grade fuel. Allied refineries collectively produced an estimated exceeding 200 million gallons for operational deployment. Each gallon demanded sophisticated refining infrastructure, specialized chemical additives including the hazardous tetraethyl lead, rigorous quality assurance testing, swift transport to Europe, secure storage facilities, and efficient distribution to numerous air bases. The industrial output of America in 1944 reached levels that appeared nothing short of extraordinary. Factories churned out bombers by the thousands and pursuit aircraft by the tens of thousands. Shipyards launched Liberty vessels at a rate that outpaced Germany's capacity to interdict them. Oil refineries generated aviation gasoline in volumes, surpassing Germany's total fuel output across all classifications. This achievement stemmed from decades of industrial advancement, abundant natural resources, a secure homeland shielded from aerial bombardment, and a workforce bolstered by millions of women who assumed vital factory roles to support the war effort. The Royal Air Force made extensive use of 150-grade fuel in its fighter operations across Europe. British squadrons operating Spitfire 14, Tempest 5, and Mustang 3 and 4 aircraft were granted preferential allocation of this advanced fuel. RAF pilots reported performance enhancements akin to those experienced by their American counterparts. The Tempest, already counted among the swiftest piston-powered combat aircraft in service, became an even more formidable aerial weapon. Tempest squadrons achieved notable success in countering the V-1 flying bombs. Between June and September of 1944, RAF 150 Wing Tempests downed 638 flying bombs, with No. 3 Squadron alone accounting for 305. Squadron leader Joseph Bry was credited with 59 V-1 kills. Belgian ace, squadron leader Remy van Liarde eliminated 44, and wing commander Roland Beaumont destroyed 31. The next most effective interceptor types were the Mosquito, with 623 victories, the Spitfire 14, with 303, and the Mustang, with 232. This performance differential proved invaluable in every operational capacity. The enhanced combat effectiveness conferred by 150-grade fuel was repeatedly demonstrated throughout late 1944 and early 1945. Fighter groups that received the new fuel reported an increase in confirmed aerial victories and a reduction in pilot losses. By March of 1945, virtually every P-51 unit was utilizing this fuel. Combat reports from this period consistently documented overwhelmingly one-sided engagements. German fighters seldom posed a significant threat to Allied formations. When engagements did occur, they typically resulted in substantial German losses. By April of 1945, missions over Germany frequently encountered no aerial opposition. The Luftwaffe had been effectively defeated, decimated by attrition, critical fuel shortages, and the systematic elimination of experienced aviators who could not be replaced. On May 8, 1945, Germany formally surrendered. The aerial conflict over Europe concluded with undisputed Allied air superiority. This dominance was attributable to a confluence of factors. The extended range of the P-51 Mustangs was paramount. The caliber of American pilot training was exceptional. The sheer numerical superiority of the Allied forces was overwhelming. However, the advantage conferred by petroleum engineering advancements through 150-grade fuel was substantial. This purple-hued gasoline transformed capable fighters into exceptional ones, instilled confidence in Allied airmen, and symbolized the culmination of technological and industrial might of nations that could outproduce, out-innovate, and ultimately outlast their adversaries. Swiftness is a critical element in aerial combat. A faster aircraft possesses the prerogative to dictate engagement terms or to disengage. Such speed affords tactical flexibility that slower adversaries lack. When American fighters achieved a demonstrably superior pace, a combination of superb airframe design and advanced fuel, the Luftwaffe's operational capacity was critically undermined. The disparity between the German and Allied situations in late 1944 and early 1945 was stark. Allied fighters could undertake multiple combat sorties daily, their operational tempo limited only by pilot fatigue and aircraft maintenance schedules. German fighters were frequently grounded due to a scarcity of fuel. When they did sortie, they were subject to stringent fuel conservation measures that curtailed their combat effectiveness. A German pilot expending excessive fuel in combat might find themselves unable to reach their home base. An Allied pilot, conversely, could deploy full throttle when necessary, assured of sufficient fuel reserves for a safe return. This operational latitude carried significant strategic implications. Allied fighters could maintain continuous combat air patrols, respond assertively to emerging threats, and sustain prolonged operational tempo. German fighters were compelled to select their engagement opportunities judiciously, conserve fuel meticulously, and often disengage from combat, not due to tactical disadvantage, but due to critically low fuel levels. Luftwaffe pilots flew with the constant awareness that each sortie could be their final one, not necessarily from enemy action, but from the potential absence of fuel for subsequent missions. Allied pilots, in contrast, operated with a profound confidence derived from material superiority. They were aware of their aircraft's superior speed, the ample fuel supply, and the robust support infrastructure. This assurance translated into more aggressive combat tactics, enhanced operational outcomes, and improved survivability rates. The narrative of 150-grade fuel is intrinsically linked to industrial warfare. Victory was ultimately secured by the side capable of producing not merely a greater quantity of aircraft, but aircraft exhibiting superior performance. Not simply adequate fuel, but fuel of exceptional quality. Not just a sufficient cadre of trained pilots, but an overwhelming abundance of highly skilled aviators supported by an industrial base that could replenish losses more rapidly than the enemy could inflict them. American and British fuel chemists toiling in laboratories, refineries never engaged in combat operations over Germany. They did not face anti-aircraft fire or enemy fighters, yet their work, quantified in performance metrics and manifold pressure readings, played a decisive role in determining air dominance over Europe in 1944 and 1945. Every instance, a P-51 pilot advanced their throttle and felt their Mustangs surge with power that German fighters could not match. They were benefiting from chemical engineering that transformed crude oil into a fuel, elevating the exceptional to the routine. German strategists had anticipated that American fighters would perform within predictable parameters based on aircraft design and standard fuel capabilities. Instead, they encountered aircraft whose performance far exceeded their projections, sustained by a fuel production infrastructure of such immense scale and sophistication that it represented an industrial capacity Germany could not hope to rival. By the spring of 1945, as Allied ground forces advanced across Germany from both east and west, the Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to function as a cohesive combat entity. A limited number of units still operated, often with barely enough fuel for a single mission. Advanced jet aircraft like the Me-262 represented a significant technological leap, but they arrived too late and in insufficient numbers, hampered by severe fuel shortages and the absence of experienced pilots who had been systematically eliminated in combat. The final assessment reveals the cumulative impact of Allied advantages. American P-51 groups across all theaters conducted hundreds of thousands of fighter sorties. They claimed approximately 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial engagements and an additional 4,131 destroyed on the ground. These figures represent not only destroyed aircraft, but also the loss of pilots, the erosion of combat experience, and the wasteful expenditure of German industrial capacity in producing replacements that were themselves rendered ineffectual before achieving strategic impact. 150-grade fuel was not the sole determinant of this outcome, but it was a crucial contributing factor. It represented the decisive margin of superiority that differentiated a closely contested struggle from an unambiguous victory. The 448 miles per hour achievable by a properly boosted P-51 signified not merely velocity but also technological preeminence and immense industrial power. This was the unforeseen development that German planners had failed to anticipate, that American fuel chemists and petroleum engineers, operating far from any battlefield, could devise a weapon as effective as any firearm or explosive ordnance. That purple-dyed gasoline could influence aerial combat as decisively as superior tactics or more proficient training. That the key to air supremacy over Europe in 1945 would involve the compression ratios of piston engines, the anti-knock properties of aromatic hydrocarbons, and aviation fuel performance metrics that surpassed anything Germany could achieve. The P-51 Mustangs that patrolled the skies over Berlin in early 1944 were remarkable machines. The P-51 Mustangs that flew over Berlin in early 1945 were the same aircraft, but they were propelled by fuel that endowed them with greater speed, increased power, and enhanced effectiveness. That difference, measured in octane ratings and performance specifications, in manifold pressure readings and airspeed indicators, was one of the many factors that determined the victor of Europe's skies. Within that resolution lay the fate of Nazi Germany and a compelling demonstration of Allied industrial might, embodied in a purple liquid dispensed into fuel tanks, consumed by potent engines, and transformed into victory, mission by combat mission.